Welcome everybody to the Click podcast for your show of DAO operational insights and alpha. The DAO space is kind of hard to traverse on your own, and there's so much happening in the DAO space every day. So why don't we tune in to the DAO operators who work at the cutting edge of crypto and coordination, and to tune in to the DAO revolution. I am your co-host Abhishek Ajit, and along with me is my co-host Abhishek Sanamne. Hi Abhishek, how are you doing?
Hey man, doing good.
Oh, fantastic, man. It's a lovely morning, and with us, we have someone that I have kind of researched, and I brought his insights for the product side of things. And I'm a big fan of the communities he's kind of contributed to. One of the reasons why I managed to get him on the podcast is because of the work he's done with DAOMasters, a community that I really respect, and we're really grateful to have had Nelson from DAOMasters for our first episode. We have with us Mark Tan, who kind of is in the role for community product over at YGG. And the sort of work that he's had prior to getting into YGG was of real interest to us, and the sort of insights that he could give us throughout his journey prior to getting into DAOs. And this whole journey to YGG was something that was really exciting for us. So glad to have you on the show, Mark. How are you
Thanks for
doing?
having me here.
Fantastic, fantastic. It's a pleasure to have you on. For our listeners who may not know your story, would you be kind enough to get into how you got into crypto and DAOs, and what were the sort of values that connected you with the concept of a DAO?
Sure. So I've been investing in blockchain since the last bull cycle, but I didn't feel like I can make any meaningful contribution as a product manager because what was needed back then was engineers, and the talks were mostly around DeFi. And that's also because I'm a little bit uncertain on whether or not I can contribute. But like many others last year, I saw that the needle moved towards mass like consumer friendly products, and I saw that finally there's a chance for me to participate. So again, like many others, I decided to join some of the, and part of that journey is understanding what DAOs are and trying to figure out what kind of DAO do I want to be part of, right? So there's a lot of different types of DAOs ranging from service, social, and so forth. So I really wanted to find my place in this world. And fortunately, DAOMasters was fundraising at that time. And I know Julia because we used to work together in my very first US startup. And I thought it would be good to support her through the fundraise and also become an active lead. So I did marketing there for one season. And that was a very good way for me to understand DAOs in as a whole.
Oh, that's fantastic. How did you kind of transition from having this sort of Web2 career to kind of working with these sort of DAOs, right? Where there are contributors coming in and going, and even though you have a lot of talent, there's a whole chaos of it that I mean, even though it's there in Web2, let's not lie about that, but there's still a structure, there's still a lot of things that can make you feel comfortable. How was that whole transition for you?
Yeah, I think I'll divide it into two parts. One is the soft skills, and then the other one is the more technical ones. So for the more technical ones, I was doing product management for a while, but I was also leading community teams in our last startup. So the concept of community-driven practices is something that is very close to heart. In fact, I was running a cohort-based course around this topic even before I joined Web3. So when Web3 happened, it felt very natural to me to build products from ground up and to do so with the public or with the community members, and that is the ethos of Web3. So I felt very much at home. So that's the first bucket, just having that experience and understanding that in crypto things are more open, transparent, and you co-design with your members. And then the second bucket is the soft skills. So I think it takes a little bit of risk and comfort in terms of navigating ambiguity and then mastering the skill of filtering noise. And that is something that I may not be an expert still, but I've gotten so used to it. So I remember spending a lot of time day in and out just listening to Twitter spaces. Thank God it's sort of slowed down a bit because that is just too much going on. But I definitely was there hanging around, scrolling through my feed. And at some point I just got used to filtering which one is interesting for me and which ones aren't, and then double down on those that are relevant to what I'm doing.
I mean, that's fantastic. You kind of had a lot of inspiration from the sort of community best practices that you did. at Web2, and the sort of what Web3 kind of enables a lot is it allows you to kind of connect broadly with the community as a whole. We just had an episode done with Abigochi, the GMI Guild, yesterday, and there was Anthony Shepard, who was kind of a guild coordinator over there. He was saying that when I was first getting into Abigochi, the sort of, I mean, I was feeling a little nervous, that you have all these founders, you have some of the core team coming in and sitting there, but they made you feel welcome. They made you feel welcome, even though there's a lot of activity going on there. They made you feel welcomed, and that sort of ease with which they could allow for that sort of anybody to come in and feel welcome, leads to that sort of community retention and all these things. I'm just kind of curious before we get into the sort of work that you did with DAOs, just for our listeners, we have this tendency to kind of look at Web2 and take out what's kind of working over there and make the most of what's worked best over there. You said you'd done some community best practices at your time with Web2. Do you see overlap with what's going on with DAOs and that community best practices? Could you share some insights about what's worked over there?
Sure, and this might be helpful for listeners who are new to Web3. But when I was in Web2, so I was working for a smart home startup, and we have a physical device that is a companion, and a software which is a companion to the physical device. So imagine like Alexa's, Google Home, right? You have that hardware, and then you have the software. So it was very hard to test the hardware device without the help of our community member. So what I did when I was there is I was working with other PMs to ship those products physically to people's homes and then collect those feedback as part of testing. Now that is different from like more traditional like product cycle where the test team is the only ones testing it, especially if you're just doing software. In hardware, it was very hard to do that inside the office, so I had no choice but to work with people. So I think when I say community practices, it goes beyond just having community as a marketing channel or having community as a supporter at the end. They are vital to the product lifecycle, and they are vital in giving you feedback as you're building building the product. And finally, it's also a different way of doing it, because when you do research, for example, you do it more like one-to-one or like focus group discussion. But when you do it with community, you open the group and then you have people discuss, collaborate like more openly. And that is like, to me, that is the best way to ensure that you're building something that is relevant to them or something that they want. And this is a long answer to your question of is there an overlap? So the answer is yes, because it's the way you build your product, right, and the way you work with your community. There is, I think, in Web3, the alignment is just more blurred between the customers, the core team members, and the stakeholders slash investors, because you can that one person can be all three at once, right? Which is something that you don't often see in Web2, especially for like public companies or later stage companies. But to answer your question, I think there's a lot of overlap in terms of how do you engage your community members as part of the product building in general.
I mean, that's phenomenal. It's kind of an immersive feedback session, and there's a lot that you can get from the community as a whole rather than just a plain feedback. And when you are able to like virtuously delve into that loop, you're able to build products that matter to these people. And in that regard, there's a lot there. But the beauty of DAOs, what they've done real well is there's a kind of a glass ceiling that that just kind of bridges, that kind of stands in the way between the users and a product. Because you have a token, and the way DAOs kind of allow for that fluid nature of power and the ability to kind of participate, communities can now immerse in the whole life cycle of the product itself if the project allows for it. And the sort of insights you have regarding the sort of project there is, it allows community to feel more connected with the project more than ever before. And that's something that I find really fascinating. And the concept of having the ownership token gives people a sort of incentive that allows them to become true stakeholders. And with this sort of transition, you kind of see this blend, and the sort of immersion that communities has. How is it like for you to kind of participate in these DAOs? And what were the sort of DAOs that you worked for? And how was your experience over there, besides like working with DAOMasters?
Oh, there's a lot. Like like I said earlier, I think the ability to adapt to change and just be comfortable with ambiguity is something that I really enjoy being part of. So I think that's one of the things that I learned. Like, oh, there's a lot of unknowns here, and to me, that's an opportunity to actually create something from scratch, right? Whether it's process, it's event, it's programming, or an actual product. So I think it's a good way. It was a good experience for me. And in terms of like what I learned, there's quite a few. Like I think one is very hard to retain people in a Web3 community. I mean, I guess that's the same that is true for other communities, right? Because people are busy and they have a lot going on, and the attention span is also short. So especially if you have a token that is liquid that people can swap. So I think it's a whole new level of community building, because now you have additional variables that you have to consider when it comes to like motivating the community members, and also motivating yourself to actually deliver and execute.
Oh, okay. So was this with your time with DAOMasters purely, or did you like contribute to other communities as well during the time? Could you delve into what those DAOs were and what exactly your role was with all of them? And how was the
Sure.
team
So
also working with them?
yeah, I mean, I guess this before we answer that question, we need to define what contribution means, right?
Okay.
So, like, I think there was a point where people were very proud saying that they're part of like a dozen servers, and to me that bar is pretty low. So when I think about contribution, I think about it as being an active member, being part of the core team, and then the bonus point is if you actually put in some if you have a stake by putting in some money in the fundraising, or actively sought out the tokens as a stakeholder, right? So so that said, I'd consider DAO Masters and Odyssey DAO as two that I was heavily involved with. So DAO Masters, I did marketing slash growth for season one by accident, because no one is raising their hand, and I just want to try it out. So I'm actually not a marketing guy, but I during that season I sort of like forced myself to write and to learn how to think about growth from a marketing perspective. So that's one. The second one is Odyssey. So as I was doing DAO Masters, I got the chance to be invited to lead the community team there. So that is closer to home because I love building communities. So when I got there, I started just being involved in different Discord channels until and then started hosting events until I created bigger and bigger community initiatives like a cohort boot camp as well. So yeah, those are the two ones that I'm part of. And of course, I've also done the jumping around different servers, but I will not count those as active contribution.
Yeah, I mean, lurking eventually gets to a point where you may feel the need to contribute or not. But yeah, I'm very fascinated by the work that you've done with OdysseyDAO. And before that, I love that even though you weren't into marketing or into the community side of things, I mean, you were a product guy, but you went straight to marketing and growth because of the entrepreneurial nature. There was some gap that was missing, and you just went in to fill it for both these DAOs, and that's the beauty that kind of feels entrepreneurial in a way, that there will always be bits and pieces that you won't know, but because you're attuned to what the community wants, you just step in to fill up the gap in that way. I mean, when you look at an entrepreneur's life also, for example, this podcast, it's tough to find good editors. So we learned it ourselves. And we continue to do it, delve into the whole editing side of things. It's turned out to be a really rewarding experience, even though this was never something we never really planned for. And that allows for you to grow as a person also. And it's really fascinating to see how you've kind of grown. Could you delve into, I mean, Odyssey DAO is something that I'm really fascinated with, the way they've kind of grown as a community as well. For our listeners, could you delve into what Odyssey DAO is and the sort of insights you've learned by seeing them grow as a community?
Sure. And before we answer that question, for those who are unfamiliar, DAO Masters is a DAO whose mission is to onboard DAO operators. And Odyssey DAO is a DAO whose mission is to like bring 1 million people into Web3 and do so in a more, let's say, non-developer centric approach. And my role there was again leading community. What I've done there is really like a lot of community management, right? So think of it as moderating activities, channels, discussions, and then thinking of ways to engage with members. So that's why I said we hosted events within Discord and Spaces and even Zoom. And then we also did workshops and invited speakers. So all of these like sort of common activities that you would see in different communities. What I learned there is, I guess number one, like it's really hard to create something that will address the needs of everyone because everyone are in different parts of their Web3 journey, right? So actually, even when I did the boot camp and even when we said that it's going to be beginners, there are some people that are more ahead, and then some people who have not opened any MetaMask wallet to start with, and like making sure that people can find the answers that they need at any point in time, whether it's through events, through cohort learning, or through Discord is really important. So that's one. The second one is, there's a lot of like learnings here, so feel free to ask more specific ones. But the second one maybe that I'll choose is like finding information and organizing through chaos. So I'm a little bit OC in terms of documenting stuff and making sure that things are available for folks. So that they don't have to ask me over and over again. So actually, I do have a notion that I maintain really well. So I think that is super important in a DAO where people are transient and people are coming and going, and like you have to keep a record of what's happening.
I think that's pretty nice, that you kind of have this sort of documentation in place. A lot of DAOs struggle to onboard, and when a DAO continues to transition into every stage of the product life cycle or something, how the community tends to coalesce also should kind of differ. But because there's so much happening, people don't document, and this just kind of leads to a lot of confusion there. So really, that's a good learning there, that you got to document everything in a way that if people leave also, then it becomes easier for new contributors to come in and pick up the reins pretty quickly. And with that, you've kind of had a lot of learnings throughout the whole DAO space. You work with the best. Now let's talk about YGG in general and your experience over there. For before we get into that, for our listeners, I mean, YGG is a big enough name, but there's a lot going on within the project that people may not be that savvy to. Could you let us know what exactly the project's all about and how the guild structure functions?
Sure. So YGG stands for Yield Guild Games. So the org's mission is to create the biggest virtual world economy. And it's a decentralized gaming guild where people can pull funds to purchase yield generating NFTs. And there's a lot of like community owned assets that are being exchanged to enable people to participate in this world. So my role there is I'm part of the product team, so leading community initiatives currently, thinking about how do we reward the most active contributors and how do we retain and engage people. And I'm doing this with other team members. So G is a very big group and we have a lot of community members. So I'm just one touch point in enabling many of our initiatives to happen.
I think that's exciting, right? That there's so much of a vision there with what YGG is trying to do. And what I love about YGG is that they've kind of managed to retain such a huge community in spite of the buy markets and all of that. And a lot of them would have just kind of died off that way. But really, they've managed to build something that people just want to come to and kind of benefit out of from. Mark, what has made YGG special that way? You kind of see a lot of these DAOs and guilds kind of die off, and why has YGG continued to make itself successful? What can DAOs take away from the way it's managed to retain its community and its retain that brand?
Sure. So I guess like this is more of a personal answer. I think in maintaining community, whether it's YGG or not, there are key important factors that has to be there. One is this sense of belonging. There should be like a cycle of trust, engagement, and relationships that formed with a shared purpose and value. So especially in a situation like this where it isn't always like rainbows. I think that's where you see, and that's where that's where you see the reasons why people are staying, and a lot of community members stay because they met good friends there and they really enjoy playing the games, right? So that's one. It's a shared purpose in going through these challenges, and then sense of belonging in terms of finding like-minded people who are interested in Web3 and gameplay. The second one is accessibility. So I think it's important for community to be simple, transparent, and accessible in many ways, right? So one of the recurring problems in DAO is onboarding and understanding how to participate. I'm not saying that in our community it's perfect and everyone can just jump in, but the more active and helpful the members are, the easier it is for people to get what they need to get started, right? So that's the second one. The third one is being inclusive. So a lot of members come from around the world, making sure that people can connect to those that have similar background or like be aware of this different cultural experiences is important, right? So you can see that manifest in a community through maybe the Discord channels or how you organize the topics, and that is a reflection of being inclusive. Yeah, and then I'll underscore the fact that they should have this mindset of having of act of service. So if people are willing to help more than they take, I think that's a very good formula for a successful community.
I think there's a lot to unpack there, this aspect of engagement, the accessibility, and things like that. But before we get to sense of belonging, it's the acts of services that I really am intrigued by. It's something that doesn't like really scale. The sort of way in which the community, especially the core team, if they're able to kind of engage that with the people who are at the fringe and who are just coming into the community, goes a long way. Like, for example, going back to the Abigochi episode, the GMI Guild, what they did was they hosted an artist summit where people could just come in and build art about the Gotchiverse. And, they were encouraging of any sort of art. It didn't have to be a Beeple level thing that they had to create about Gotchiverse. Just something that was drawn on a napkin tissue also, that level also, they were willing to accept it because there's so much love there. How do you think communities should kind of allow for that sort of engagement to happen, where they can allow for communities to kind of express and provide that sort of gratitude to kind of do that sort of service for the community? How do you think they should create that sort of space?
I think you alluded to it. So like to me, two things are true. People want to be heard and people want to be recognized, right? Recognition is like, at least for example, for YGG, recognition is like giving them an ability to express themselves by achieving a quest, like placing in a leaderboard, and then having people actually recognize that effort. So that is a very powerful way for people to stay because they know that people appreciate them. The second one, like related to that, is having a forum for people to ask questions. So there's no stupid question. Someone has that question, another person might have that as well, and then having moderators and volunteers get to that as well. So I'm actually very surprised because every time I check Discord and someone asks a question, it's going to be answered within a time frame. And I think that's a very good signal that the community is working because it's not reliant on like one or two people. It's a collective effort of members in the community to help each other out.
I think that's fair. You kind of mentioned that YGG has a leaderboard to kind of reward people as well. Could you kind of get into the details of that? I think, is that part of the Guild Advancement program that you're talking about, or was this something that was there before? I mean, when you talk about the leaderboard, is that purely out of them winning in the games, or is it out of kind of doing good things for the community or kind of participating in the community? How does that work?
Yeah, there's a combination, right? So like that is a very general term for just like game advancement within the respective games, but there's also like contribution through like community moderation or being helpful or testing the game. So I mean, those will have its like quote unquote its own leaderboard. So like those are being tracked not in like a monolithic way. So like we're tracking them separately. The individual subgroups have their own processes and ways to do that. So yeah, those are very good way to those are very good ways for us to see who are the most active members, and then it's also a way to let people shine in their own.
But it begs the question, that when you have this sort of leaderboard come in and you have that sort of incentive come into play, does that become more about the incentive rather than really sticking to help the community out? People may just care about the incentive, so they're just kind of doing it, but deep inside, they don't really care about the community that much, even though the incentives are aligned. What happens when one day the incentives just don't match and that sort of culture doesn't exist? Where do you kind of draw the balance between allowing for the culture to grow that sort of heartfelt response or something that comes from the incentive and the leaderboard alone? How do you kind of design that within the community?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I see that question, and the way to address that is to make sure that it's not like single trap of people just doing the same thing, right? So you have events happening in real life, online. You have activities that are not specific to the games that are happening to allow people to get to know each other, and that's been true for the communities that I've seen, including YGG. I think there's also different levels of like incentive. So there's an incentive that people get as they earn, and when they and as they play the game, but there's also incentive in terms of like gameplay competitiveness, right? So a lot of people actually do want to learn and master the game because they do enjoy it. So I think just thinking of all of these together makes it, how do you say this, like thinking of this collectively is actually an interesting way to see that people aren't there just for one single thing. They are there for other people, for the game, for the reward, and then the rewards come in multiple levels as well.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, this is from a public nature of how things work within YGG. Could you get into the sort of structure and how the community can kind of grow within the community itself? How does the whole relationship between the core team and the community kind of works? And how they're able to grow within the subgroups? What sort of roles do they have? And how does a guild advancement program kind of help them kind of do their bit for that?
Sure. So there's a lot of questions there. So let me answer the guild advancement and how the community grows. So I mean, actually, the community is open if you want to look at it, and then you'll see there's a lot of channels divided according to regions, to games, and then you can go in there to get tips on how to play the game, or like how to understand what's happening in that world, right? And then the guild advancement is actually one of the offers that we have for badge holders. So for anyone who's holding a badge, they can participate in that program that runs for up to 3 months. Within the 3 months, there are different activities or quests that you can participate. A lot of them are competitive play, but a lot of them are also like just rewarding meaningful contributors. So examples include like being a moderator, or helping with the game testing, like I mentioned earlier. So all of that are listed in our site, and then you can choose your own adventure in terms of where do you want to allocate your time, and then you can find the right contact in the right subgroup or slash channel once you decided that you want to invest your effort in certain areas. And then you can also switch. Like, it doesn't mean that you sign up for one and that's the only thing that you'll do for the next 3 months. It's, again, going back to it really matters on what activities you enjoy doing and where you want to spend your time. And there's always something for anyone who wants to participate in the program.
No, I kind of see how your initial advice, you kind of have the pathways for people to contribute. The inclusivity part is covered. You kind of have the badges coming in and reinforcing that belonging. It's you have that accessibility for people to come in and grow into the organization, and ultimately rewards are given depending on how much you're kind of like really giving that sort of like that altruistic nature towards anybody who's kind of coming in with the moderation and things like that. It's pretty lit, that whole framework is just kind of ingrained in how YGG does things, and that's nice that way. So stepping back, to your experience kind of handling the product side of, you kind of see that YGG is kind of interfacing for a lot of games that kind of succeed. And there's a lot of product oriented nature that YGG kind of brings in the picture, especially when you consider the guild advancement program. There's a lot there. When you look at DAOs currently, there's a lot of accusations that it's kind of oriented around vibes only at times for a lot of these social DAOs and things like that. So in order for them to like really sustain, and not just for social DAOs, for any community in general, there's a need for them to kind of get into the whole product oriented thing. What should DAOs keep in mind while coming out with products that tailor for the crypto world, you know?
That's a big question. So like to me, when we think about DAOs, there are key elements that makes it different from like your Web2 community, right? There's the token, there's a governance, and the way you operate with the community member is more public and transparent. So that said, I think those are the things that I would keep in mind for groups when they are starting or maintaining their DAOs. You have to operate in a way where you think of your community members as your team as well, and that means that as much as possible you should act and do your things more publicly, and then you should learn how to communicate more openly in more public channels as opposed to keeping it in like group DMs. And I know that's very tactical, but I think that's really one of the key things that people should understand. Like when you operate in a DAO, everyone is your teammates. So I think if you're able to navigate that principle well, I think that will set the foundation and good tone for how you operate as a DAO. And then of course, as you get more advanced and you have people putting proposals and people voting, that is just advancing the way you communicate, right? So yeah, and then you can put mechanics in place to make sure that people are aware of what's happening, what the rules are, and so forth. But again, it goes back to communication, effective communication with the community.
So that's fascinating. You know, you want that community to kind of ingrain itself so that it allows for that virtuous loop. And that loop, if done right, can get you the sort of iteration that builds that sort of successful products. But you take a look at DAOs lately, you know, what makes a DAO great is that communities have the option to kind of get ownership because of the token. But you take a look at DAOs, they kind of go through the same market cycles just like any other project in this space. And especially when you have a token that's at the heart of the community, you know, what happens is that the community also ebbs and flows. We just had a conversation with Coach Viking from Polygon DAO, and he said that during a bear market, it's only the core contributors that tend to stick around. But when it's a bull market, everybody just wants to come in and contribute and things like that. So during such times, you know, bear markets and things like that, when you just have the core contributors coming in, how do you effectively inspire the community to kind of do their best? And as a core team, how do you continue having that sort of community engagement?
Yeah, actually, it doesn't matter. I realized, because to me, you go back to what is the mission, why did you join, and why do you think the person joined, right? So like for so far, for the examples that I gave, I joined because I've set a goal for myself to help upscale the world and then move the world over to Web3. So that is my personal mission, and I joined DAOMasters because I want to help onboard DAO operators. I joined OdysseyDAO because I want to learn about the space and I want to help others. And I think if you stay true to the mission of the DAO, your personal mission, and align that with the interests of the person coming in, then I think it's going to be ideally easier for you to find that project or initiative that this person can contribute to, because you're trying to align everything across these different individuals.
And that's pretty good now. But the thing is, you're a very self-driven person. You know, you have your mission right, you know what you care about, and that is always your north star. But when you look at 90% crypto prices down, you see the hysteria. Some people don't have that. So what makes strong communities work out is they are able to kind of exude their mission. They are able to kind of perform publicly in such a way that it inspires people to kind of rally through and work for the community in spite of the prices going down. I mean, Gitcoin is the best example of that. Went through severe bear markets during 2018 and 19, but because of the sheer force of nature, tenacity of Owaki and his team, they were able to rally together the community and make a success out of their grants program. They made hackathons a business model because they wanted to sustain the grants. That's the extent to which these people kind of went to sustain their community and make things happen. Do you see that sort of tenacity from DAOs these days? And how do you kind of bridge that gap to allow them to kind of inspire the community?
Yeah, I think I mean, what you said is definitely true, right? So it's hard to keep going if you join peak and then everything is down. But I think you have to keep in mind, my advice is to keep in mind that for any sector, there are multiple things happening. You have the technology, you have the business, and then you have the people, right? Slash culture. So like when things like this happen, the prices go up and down, but the builders and the technologists who are actually building the infrastructure and the platform and the tooling, they don't stop. Like they just keep on building it. For people who are part of the community, who learned to navigate and find really good people in those communities, those people will stay, right? So I think what I'm saying is like don't get distracted with what's happening with the price. If you're new, I actually think that my hot take is NFTs and DeFi might not be the like sort of categories or products to try. You can probably just try to go into a DAO because the barrier is low and then you don't have to put out your money, right? So again, I guess you just need to find the track that you'll be comfortable with, and that track doesn't always have to be attached to a price.
No, I think pretty fair that way, you know. As long as you kind of exude that sort of brand identity, and you can't expect everyone to be that contributor. Out of probably 100, if during bad times 30 of them would kind of rally through there and they are able to kind of get inspired, that itself is enough to kind of rally the next 1,000 people when things does look a little better. You don't even need to wait for the bull market, you know. You can kind of make an impact during the bear market itself if you know what you're doing. And with that said, what I love about the whole YGG and the whole guild advancement thing is you have, with the leaderboard and all of that, you have this sort of reputation systems that are already ingrained into how, how you should kind of contribute to the YGG cause, how, all these things are kind of done. And a lot of what DAOs are kind of the whole fad right now, if I may put it lightly, is that you want to have reputation as the next layer for scaling these sort of communities in a sustainable fashion. If you make things accessible for everyone, you tend to get exploited by bad actors. If you kind of allow for people to kind of work through, they just walk away without that sort of reputation mechanism. eh, you're not able to scale it in a sustainable with the sort of way in which the whole leaderboard system works with YGG and things like that. How do you think do you kind of agree with the sentiment that reputation models should be added within DAOs to scale? And if yes, uh, seeing how YGG does things, is there some sort of insights that could work with DAOs?
So two things there. I don't think you need reputation model to for DAOs to scale. I do think you need that if you want to retain and engage people, if that makes sense, right? So
Yeah.
if you're just talking about scaling in terms of numbers, then you can add members. You don't need any reputation. You just need to have a lot of activities, interesting ones that people can participate to get going. However, the reputation is a symbol in proof of work and belonging and identity. So the more you craft this to your respective communities, the better it is for people who are participating to be able to express themselves, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think it's important to recognize. It goes back to what we discussed earlier, right? Recognizing people and appreciating their effort, and those contributions and rewards is one form of doing that.
I think that's kind of fair there. How you kind of align incentives with the sort of work that if you have a record of that, that kind of goes a long way. And as you mentioned that reputation, it's not necessary for scaling, but it's from a retention standpoint. Even if you grow those numbers, it's not enough, right? If they continue to drop off without believing in the product, you're not scaling sustainably. If you're kind of getting the numbers, they should come in again and again. And that is sustainable scaling, in my opinion. And that
Yeah.
retention part is what uh, is key for kind of scaling here in that sense. And with that, just want to step back and just talk about what's in store for you personally with the sort of role that you're doing with YGG. What can you expect from YGG down the road? And yeah.
There's a lot happening. Personally, I'll continue to do what I do in terms of creating ways to reward meaningful contribution within the community. I would love. I'll be more active in terms of game participation. In various ways. So testing games, inviting people, inviting partners to work with the initiative. So yeah, that's what's in store. And like we are mid-season for some of the activities that we're doing. And then most likely we'll be busy preparing for what's to come for next year in Q4.
Oh, that's pretty lit. I mean, you kind of test out a lot of these games, man. So, what are the Web3 games that you think could do really well down the road?
Oh man, that's a hard question because there's a lot. Just because I'm close to a lot of them, some of them, I'd say I really like Gods Unchained. I think they do really well in terms of thinking about gameplay. Genopets is another one, and then Guild of Guardians. So this different variety of mobile RPG and just move to earn and so forth. I think those are interesting spaces.
Oh, that sounds pretty. And looking at the way DAOs kind of do well, I mean, you kind of interface with a lot of DAOs. 5 years down the road, which DAOs will kind of hit the citadel?
I think it depends on one, the size of their treasury, the mission, and then the number of community members. So like we have the big players like Uniswap and Aave that has a DAO that lets people like borrow and lend assets. Those things will always stay. And then education ones, I'm also bullish. So I'm part of Odyssey, but big ones like developer DAOs, I think does a very good job in like cultivating builders and actually placing them in the in the ecosystem afterwards. So these are just a subset of what I think DAOs, a subset of the DAOs that I think will do well in the future.
That sounds super. Developer DAO is just killing it. The way in which they onboard developers and the sort of community they've grown in such a short span of time. I think it's not even been a year and a half or something. Wow, crazy amount of growth, and people just love being part of that community. I think we should reach out to them next and see how they kind of do things. And yeah, OdysseyDAO is also pretty phenomenal. That we just love the sort of work that Peter Young and sort of the team is kind of doing over there. With that, we kind of one final question. I mean, since community product itself is an intersection that is kind of still kind of nascent, I believe it's not nascent, but there's a lot of scope there. How can people, in terms of the best resources that way, or the best people to follow, who do you think should people kind of follow to kind of make it big in the Web3 space?
Oh, that's a very large list. I'd say start with what you're most interested in, whether it's like DeFi, DAO, NFT, and then go like maybe 1, 2 levels deep because I cannot just give you one name to there is no one person who knows everything. Let's put it that way, right? So like I'll start with like Peter Young in terms of like creator economy, community, education. That's one that you can follow just because we're also discussing it. And then there's a lot of people who are building. So I think it's important for you to understand which topics.
Oh, fantastic. Just subscribe to his Substack probably a week back. Can't wait for his updates. And with that, we come to a close. There's a lot of insights there that, I have to personally unpack when the episode's over, about kind of retaining this sort of community, allowing for that sort of sense of belonging, that sort of inclusivity. I really enjoyed your journey and the way in which all these insights kind of unpack with the work you did in Web2 and the work you did with DAOs and the sort of work that you're continuing to do with YGG. How can people follow you and the projects you care about?
Yeah. People can reach out through LinkedIn or Twitter. It's Mark Hanef, and then my name on LinkedIn.